So I'd just like to say hello and welcome to this fireside chat with Maryam Pasha, the director of TEDx London. In the next hour or so, myself and Miles, two of the ESU's young members, will be chatting to Maryam about all things TEDx and the importance of what she does. I'd like to firstly thank the ESU's London branch and the newly formed Oracy Group for helping put on this event. And I will now hand over to Miles to introduce our guest.
Thank you for the introduction, Serena. So I suppose when you're meeting anyone, especially someone who is the curator and director of TEDx London, you kind of wonder, how do they get there in the first place? Which is, how does the shiny person come out on the other side? And I suppose the thing from reading a few, speaking to Maryam last week, and also reading and watching and listening to the various podcasts and YouTube videos that she's in, I suppose the thing that links your career together is actually amplifying voices, especially amplifying marginalized voices. Recently, that's something that's kind of linked your career. So early on in Maryam's career, she was working in human rights. She, for example, was the director of operations for a global conference on the prevention of genocide. Went on to become to be a presenting partner with Women on the Move Award, later on becoming head of events and innovation at the Migrants' Rights Network as well, which is an NGO which works alongside migrants in their fights for rights and justice. And I suppose that's really informed and being quite pivotal to what Maryam does today in her work in TEDx London, and also the kind of subsidiaries of that, I suppose, that you can kind of describe as being that TEDx London Women, TEDx OpenX, which is for a platform for speakers under the age of 25 to take part in TEDx talks and have that opportunity to get their voices heard. And also recent Climate Curious podcast, which I think has just gone into the second season as well, which is super exciting. But I suppose the first question that I'd like to ask is, what is the reason that you do what you do today?
Hi, thanks, Miles, and thanks, Serena. Thank you both for the great introduction. It's good to see all of you here. I am really looking forward to this. So why do I do what I do? I think you touched on some of it very kind of eloquently, Miles, around wanting to amplify voices, but I think it's fundamentally what I believe is that we are at a point in kind of our story as humanity where we need new voices, new ideas, and we need to hear it from new storytellers. We need to maybe stop listening to the same people that we've been listening to for the last 2,000 years and have a look at what perspectives and what places we have been ignoring, because maybe some of the answers that we are so desperately needing and some of the solutions and some of the ideas live there. And what I believe part of my work is to do is to help support those new voices to feel, to develop their messages, to develop their stories, to build a belief in themselves and the value of what they have to say so that when they speak, other people listen. So that's kind of really what motivates me.
Fantastic. And is there any particular case, for example, that really sticks out for you, a particular voice for you?
Yeah, so I've been organizing and running TEDx events for 10 years, and I've coached over 200 TED and TEDx speakers. For those of you who kind of are in that world, you'll know that every now and again, a TEDx speaker kind of gets amplified from the TEDx platform over to the big HQ that is TED.com, and 10 of the speakers I've worked with so far have had that happen, and their talks have had about 15 million views. So it's been pretty cool. But one speaker who is not part of that 10, who really stood out to me, was someone I worked with in 2019. So her name is Paisy Mahmood. She, when I worked with her, she hadn't spoken really anywhere. She had just decided to start talking about her story and her experiences. And I met her through a contact of mine from my human rights days. And she was a young woman, early 30s. She's from a Kurdish Iranian background, but grew up since she was very small in the UK. And she had survived a child marriage here in the UK. And she wanted to tell that story, because although she survived, her sister didn't. And by survived, I mean survived abuse, rape, violence, and the loss of her whole family, as well as the brutal murder of her sister in an honor killing. It was quite a lot. And she was determined to get her story out there. And this was the beginning really of her campaign to change the law in England and Wales to increase the minimum age of marriage. She was so compelling, but she was super nervous. Anyway, we worked together for about 9 months, and it was a really intensive it's probably one of the most intensive pieces of work I've done with a speaker, because it's dealing with something so ultimately personal to them. And then in December 2019, she got on stage in front of 1,200 people, and she gave this talk that, the room was silent. And I've kind of never seen that reaction from an audience before. It's hard to say about that subject matter that it was a brilliant talk, but it was a brilliant talk. And I was super proud of her because she'd never done this before. Anyway, let's fast forward a year and a half to now. That talk has had just broke 1 million organic views. It a month ago, the government announced that it was changing the law in England and Wales based on the campaign that Paisley was kind of the face of, and that although it didn't mention it in any of the press, we knew that kind of the Prime Minister and senior members of the cabinet had been sent her talk to watch as the first introduction to getting them on board for changing this law. This is something that campaigners have been trying to do for a decade, but she was able to do it a year and a half because because by using her voice and being able to tell her story so effectively, she was able to gain the support and the solidarity of people who wrote to their MPs, who emailed kind of their friends and told them to support it. And it's just amazing to see. And that's very much a great example of why I do what I do.
Fantastic. I remember hearing Party's story as well myself. So I think that, that's such a powerful message to send, and a powerful thing that you're doing in your day to day, and amplifying voices like this, which is fantastic. I suppose that, my follow-up question for that would be, how do you create that environment to invite these sort of voices onto TEDx?
Yeah, I will say, not every speaker we work with is speaking about something so incredibly personal, but I would say that to a degree, whenever you're speaking about something you care about, it feels personal, right? You have something invested in it, something on the line. And so the first thing we do is to make sure speakers know that we are on their side. So we are there as a resource, right? And that we will never put them in a position where they are unhappy with what they create, but we'll also never force them to do something they don't want to do. A lot of times the thing, and I was surprised to hear this, but the thing that surprises speakers is that we don't come to them and say, we want you to talk about this specific thing, or we want you to say this. We really let that be a process or a journey that we go on together to discover it. So part of it is about creating a space where it feels like a collaboration, or that we are really a trusted partner, helping people. And to be honest, even in my non-TEDx work, in my commercial work, I found that is very much the role that I play, particularly when I'm working with really senior leaders. They're not interested in someone coming in and telling them what to do, but they are interested in having someone who's on their side and will give them whatever that support is that they need to get to wherever they need to get to.
Yeah, and just following up on that, on a more macro level, when you look at sort of government policy and how oracy and the ability to articulate yourselves and the link with that to the curriculum, given that Paisley was able to use her voice, her speech was bounced around cabinet in the WhatsApp groups, that's such an amazing way to get her message across. So given you've seen so many cases like that from sort of inception to the final product, what would you personally like to see from government policy, and what would you like ministers to do to get oracy into the curriculum?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing with Paisley, right, is that she had this opportunity to work with me and my team. That is a one-off. So you know, even with, as I said, in kind of my commercial work, those are often individuals that can afford to bring someone in to work with them. There's a exclusivity of access to this kind of support, because the thing is that we tell people over and over again, it's really important to tell your story. Your voice is valuable. Like, you should speak up. You know, you should feel confident. But we even give them training on how to build their confidence, which I have issue with, because I don't think confidence comes from nowhere. But what we never do is tell people how. We never tell them to go from where they are to where we want them to be, right? Like, even if young people, even if anyone agrees that yes, they want to use their voice, they're never, very rarely given the bridge, right? And that's what I do. But then, as I said, like, I'm one person, there are other people here who probably do that work. We're one people. It's different to have something like that embedded in the curriculum, because actually, when you look at, like, I went to school in the US, you know, I went to a school that had all of this extracurricular stuff. It was so amazing. It was extracurricular. So if I had just not gone to a school which had none of that extra stuff, I would have never learned to use my voice. It seems a shame that something that is so fundamental is left to either the very privileged few, who are often the privileged few who don't need it, because they're going to be listened to anyway. Mm-hmm. So if we really, you know, when we talk about wanting diversity in the workplace or diversity in an industry, so much of that rests on being able to speak up for yourself, or being able to feel confident enough to go to that interview or apply for that job, or to tell that story of who you are. And that stuff has to start young. So I would love for all young people to have equal access to that opportunity, so that we really see actually who has the ideas that we want to hear from. I mean, you know, Simon, I see your chat comment. Like, Simon, I had the great privilege of having Simon speak at TEDx London a few years ago, and you know, you talked exactly about this, and I couldn't agree more.
No, I definitely agree. I only got involved with debating in the ESU through an extracurricular club at school, and if that hadn't happened, I would never have discovered it. And Miles, I'm sure it was the same for you or similar. And I know the ESU have been doing work with the APPG for oracy to try and push for this, to try and actually make change that will impact our curriculums. And for students, it's not just high school students, it's primary school students as well. If we start them off from a young age, the ability to sort of process what's in your brain and speak it out is truly a luxury only afforded by a few, and only afforded by people who can sort of pay for it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems crazy to me that, you know, so I don't know if many of you are familiar with Garry Kasparov, you know, the famous chess player who lost to a computer. And he wrote a book a few years back about what he'd learned from losing to a computer, and because it was a tough blow for him. And he had this incredible message around how, as we come to a world where computers are going to do more and more of the jobs and take more and more of the roles, whether those be robotic computers, whether they be algorithms, whatever, that what role do humans play? And he came to this beautiful conclusion that it's about finding this incredible symbiosis between technology and humans, that allow the technology to do what the technology does best, and allow humans to do what humans do best. And I think that one of the things that humans do best is tell stories. And so we should be, it's an enduring skill, you know, for us to teach young in schools. It's not a skill that's going to be out-coded by a computer in 10 years.
No, definitely. I didn't have experience of losing to a computer at chess, but I do have experience of being able to articulate myself and process my own thoughts. And I think that would lead me to my next question, which is, where do you see the purpose of TEDx in 2021? Where do you think, given oracy in the curriculum is sort of in its infancy stages, it's still sort of getting up and running, what do you think TEDx's purpose is in that sort of beginning stages?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, TEDx is such a unique program, like for TED to give away its brand like this, you know, for those of you who are not kind of as familiar with it, because why would you be familiar with reading the details of the TEDx world? You know, TEDx is a free license that anyone can have. You basically apply to TED. There are some criteria that you meet, and then they essentially give you this brand that they have spent decades building for you to use to platform and support ideas that you think the world should hear from. And so every TEDx is so different. But I have felt, and the team that I have around me have felt quite strongly from day one, that our job is not to give another platform to people who already have one. So oftentimes we'll hear from people who, you know, you'll see at TEDx's that have very well-known speakers, and I get that. You know, I also run a commercial business. You know, TEDx London does have to turn over and be balance the books at the end of the day, and I get that. But actually, our purpose, and I think the purpose of platforms like this should be to be a platform for the people who are actually doing the work, who don't always have time to update their Instagram, who don't always have time to give an interview for a newspaper, who haven't maybe been given that award, but are actually doing really great work and have really great ideas to share. And I think the other part of this is to say, and this is from an interview that I saw with Chris Anderson, who is the global head of TED, that he sees the TEDx program and TED, the future of it being about communicating ideas that start in languages other than English out to the world. Because that's the other thing, right? Like, so much of what we hear is so centered around people who can master the English language. But actually, as TEDx's are in like 180 countries, like, we get to hear ideas from all around the world. So we can actually hear what is happening and get those insights, which I think is super exciting.
I suppose being in TEDx London and having such a diverse community, it gives you also that access as well.
Access to the diversity of voices or to the language. I mean, we have been pretty English focused at London, but definitely I think there's a responsibility we have as TEDx London to reflect the diversity that is London. You know, it would be really easy for us to put on an event for the 1% in London. You know, charge £350 a ticket, do it at a really exclusive venue, get some fancy alcohol brands on board, get some fancy speakers, some influencers in the room, couple of press, there you go, right? What's harder is to take a venue like the Royal Festival Hall that seats almost 2,000 people, that charges us like we're a corporate business, even though we're a volunteer-run nonprofit, and fill that with, yes, people who are willing to pay, you know, 20, 30, 40 quid for a ticket, but also 200 or 300 people who we give the tickets to for free, to truly reflect what London is, when we reach out to unions and to teachers and to students and to community groups and to, you know, the people that we want to be there in the room. Because yes, you think that most of the stuff that happens at TEDx events is what happens on stage, and you know, unfortunately with the pandemic the focus has had to be in that way when we've done our events virtually. But when we're in person, so much of that magic is about the conversations you have with just a random stranger in the lift afterwards. For us, it's so important that London and our audience and our stage be reflective of what it means to be a Londoner.
Yeah, for sure. And I imagine that having virtual events has only hampered that in your sort of quest to try and get people to be talking.
Yeah, it's harder. You know, we've had some wins. We figured out some ways to do it. I will say one thing that the pandemic has forced us to do is, by going online, we now have a way of engaging with people who can't even get to events, because that's the other thing that is, you know, is something that I have the privilege as an able-bodied person not to think about, or as someone with who doesn't have social anxiety not to think about. I don't feel the kind of I can go to live events if I want to, you know, but for many people, live events were out. We did a lot of work around making, around our kind of accessibility charter to make our events more accessible, from quiet rooms where you could go and just process what you'd heard, to relaxed rooms where you could watch the live show that was happening in the room next to you on a screen, but you could bring your kids. If you ticked, you could tick. If you needed to like talk to people, you could talk to people. You know, if your kid was crying in the background, that's all right. Theatres have done this, which I absolutely love. So we've done all of that, but we hadn't really addressed the people who don't even get to the theatre. And so by being able to find ways to engage people remotely, I think we now as a team feel a responsibility to continue always having a virtual element to our events so that we have that broader reach, because really that's, for us, it's all about making sure that the speakers' ideas get as far as possible. And so, we have to do that work.
Fantastic. Well, it's so great that so many more people who wouldn't have usually have had access to these talks have now got access to them. I know that certainly for me, being able to pop in on a Zoom chat and listen to like what we're doing right now, but to this kind of talk, at 5 p.m. is absolutely fantastic. So that's been one of the positive things that have definitely come out of this pandemic, and to have those conversations has been fantastic. So I suppose thinking about the events themselves, what sort of advice would you give to people who are wanting to become involved in TEDx? As
speakers?
As speakers.
So I think the first thing is to know that every TEDx is so different. So there are like 3,500 of me's all around the world. Each license holder has a different way that they curate, a different thing they're looking for, a different way they find speakers. Some will have open applications where you can apply and they have rounds. Some will only approach speakers and never take applications. Some it's halfway in between. But the starting point for any really, really great talk is being clear about why you're speaking. Chris Anderson talks about this idea of TED speakers being generous, and I absolutely love it. Like, what is it that you want to give to an audience? Why do you believe so passionately in this one idea that you would volunteer to essentially have me on your back for 6 months, come to endless trainings, get endless rounds of feedback, memorize a 15-minute talk, get up, deliver it again and again and again and again until you're sick of it? To enter into that process, I would say be really clear that you know why you're doing it. What is it that you want to say? And ask yourself, have a real conversation with yourself that says, is this an idea worth spreading? Is this something that is about me, or is this something that's actually about getting something out there? The best speakers are the ones where it's not about them at all. And then, and then I say just do your research. So there's the practical stuff, right? Like, do your research, think about the theme that a TEDx has, what you want to talk about, links to that theme, see if there are applications, and then all that practical stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, and how would you sort of link the real world into that? And as from a sort of coach perspective, how do you sort of, if you can see an idea that's clearly got legs, it's clearly got something in there, but the person hasn't quite refined it or quite sort of positioned it correctly so that it can be less personal and more outward, how would you go about sort of coaching them and developing their idea to be something that could be broadcasted?
Yeah, such a great question, because Miles, I think when you were doing my intro, you mentioned OpenX, which is our young speakers program. So many of the young people we speak with, in fact, we are purposeful and say your idea doesn't need to be fully formed yet. There just has to be a nugget. What I would say is that sometimes your actual idea worth spreading lives inside of what you think you're talking about. And the only way to get to it is to go through. So this is about, for me as a coach, this is about asking all those questions, about digging, but also about listening to someone. Sometimes I will just spend half an hour with a client or with a speaker the first time, just asking loads of questions and listening for a few things in particular, for when their kind of eyes light up or their tone of their voice changes, because that is the thing that they really want to be talking about. A lot of times people think that they need to pitch to me the things they think they should be talking about, but not the things that they really want to be talking about. And sometimes my job is to guide them from one to the other. Sometimes often it's because someone comes to me with something that's too big, right? And we have to work to make it really small. 15 minutes is not long, and if you want to do it justice, you have to be focused. I think it's the reason why TED Talks do so well is that focus. And so much of that work is honing down to that center. And sometimes, you know, sometimes what will happen is we'll find a center and we'll go down that path and we'll realize, nah, that wasn't right. We have to back up and go down the other path. Sometimes we'll think we found a center. You know, this happened classically with a talk with one of my speakers this year. We think we found it. This one particularly was in an area that is like an area of my own expertise. So I was super excited about it. You know, we're working on it. And then we get to like, we're already at like draft 3 or 4. And I realized very quickly that she's melded 2 talks together. And we have to then do this, like, imagine like unpicking process of what content belongs in each and pull them apart. But it makes all the difference.
Yeah, no,
so
I
must
imagine
be that whole process. Oh, so that process must be, is it sometimes fast for some people? Is it a short process, long process? I know you mentioned 6 months for most people. Is that for most people?
Yeah, I would say 6 months. You want to give yourself 6 months for a TEDx talk. You know, some people can be shorter. Like, for example, sometimes when I work with academics or researchers or campaigners, where they are very clear about it's this research finding, it's this campaign, it's this action, then we can get to stuff more quickly. But you've also got the whole memorization and all of that kind of stuff. But I will say that narrowing down process or that unpicking process is painful, like really painful for speakers, not as much for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, how painful is it for you?
You know, for me, it's painful because I say this, but I fall in love with every single one of my speakers, right? Like, I'm just so in awe of them. And so it's hard for me sometimes to see them suffering. And it's also that sometimes I know where they're going to get to, but I know they don't know that yet.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of talk about it as the valley of despair. So, you know, at some point in your TEDx process, this can happen in writing, it can happen in editing, it can happen in thanks Katja, in memorizing. You will get to a point where you hate it all, right? And you just think, I hate this, I hate you, I hate this topic, I'm not memorizing this. My partner did a TEDx talk for a different TEDx, and I told him this was going to happen, and he didn't believe me, and you can imagine having me as a partner giving a TEDx talk means that for 3 months I had to practice it every single day at least twice. So it was, you know, a tough one for him. But it was the night before his talk that he turned to me and went, I think I've just emerged. I think I've just broken through the clouds of what is in this valley. And it does happen. It will happen at some moment. I know that each speaker will get through it if they have the right support. And I know that our team gives them the right support, but it's hard to watch them go through that. This year I will have to say this year was particularly difficult. Like, we had our last event in February this year. It was supposed to be in December. It got moved. You know, having to work with speakers where you know that at minimum, they're just dealing with a global pandemic, but at maximum, they're dealing with an unknown number of things going on and trying to help them not lose the faith. We had 2 speakers who actually got stuck outside of the UK, and how we had to film them remotely. Like, there was a lot to contend with this year, but yeah, it's not an easy process for anyone.
No, for sure. And I think my next question would be, I know this is going to be quite a difficult one, is what advice would you give when you first started getting involved in TEDx that you think you'd really benefit from now?
As to speakers?
To yourself.
To myself.
Given that you've sort of ran it for so long and you've got all the pearls of wisdom in there.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to get, how do I put this nicely? Like, don't be afraid to uninvite people early or late. And by that I mean, sometimes, you know, speakers will like, in the beginning, like in the first TEDx I did, I never set any deadlines or any requirements. You know, I just would have like a chat with the speaker. And in fact, I know this is how long I've known Simon. Simon hosted the first TEDx I did, so he's seen the whole evolution. And I didn't think I could ask anything of them. And over the years, I got better of saying, okay, actually, we need drafts from you. We need you to meet these deadlines. but still, even when I was asking for those things, I didn't always have the courage to say, look, you've missed all of these, and it's doing you a disservice if we keep going. Now I think 10 years in, we've got much better at setting clear expectations from the very, very beginning, and then not waiting until like 3 weeks before or a week before to bring it up, but like as soon as you miss something, we're like, okay, is this not working for you? We can tweak it, but we need to know now. And that can be a really hard adjustment process in the beginning. But now I think the speakers appreciate it. They know what they're getting themselves into, and they know the support is going to be there, and they know they can ask for help. So that's what I would have said, is not be afraid to set those really strict boundaries that are flexible but are there from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult thing to do, and it's a difficult thing to sort of communicate to people you've never met before and who've got all of their ideas in their head. And we've had a question in asking how do you encourage people to take up the free opportunities that you offer within TEDx London?
Yeah, we're really lucky that TED spent decades building a brand that people love and have such an emotional connection with, that we just get so much love from people out there, because, and I'm constantly amazed by this, because TED is so meaningful for people. People have said, like, it saved my life, it saved my mental health, it saved my relationship. It's just so wonderful. And so when you have that kind of emotional connection with a brand, it is actually quite easy for us to get people to work with us and take those opportunities up. But I will say this, well, especially when we started working with younger people, we had to be really, I'm no longer a young person. And even though my team is young, most of them are still over 25. Like, they're under 30, but they're still over 25. So in that weird middle gray zone. And we had to be really careful clear that this demographic we were working for probably had a different set of, like, how do I put it, something that's going to work for an academic who's used to deadlines and has been doing this for 70 years might not work for a kid from West London. That maybe what we need to do is make sure we're just as rigorous, but we communicate in a way that shows that we're on their side much more upfront. And so again, it's when I think about free opportunities, it's asking yourself, like, what's in it for these people to participate? Like, why would they participate? Just because something is free doesn't mean it's valuable, right, to them. So we're always thinking, like, what's in it for you? What's in it for me? We're answering that question for our audience. Like, what's in it for me? Why am I here?
How do you get that message out? I get the idea of getting that message out, but how does that actually happen in practice?
So we work with other organizations who know us and trust us, and had then built those links of trust with, let's say in this example, young people. So whether that's schools or organizations or individuals all around London, we worked with them to get the message out, so that it was coming from people that young people trusted. And I guess because, again, that we have that TEDx brand, there is a degree of trust that people have with us. They can look at our website and our past speakers, and they know the kinds of values we represent. We're very clear about who we are and who we're not.
Has that process been difficult to say who you are and who you're not? Because I suppose TED Talks and TEDx are different. So sometimes that must come as both a benefit for you, but also is that difficult? Does that come with any baggage?
Yeah. So when I started this journey, the world, like, if you remember what the world might have been like in 2011, it looked very, very different. The conversations that we were having were very, very different. But, at that time I was working very solidly in the human rights world, and I had a very specific point of view, as did the people on the team. And we decided to be very led by a specific point of view from the very beginning. Yes, TED is about being interdisciplinary. Yes, it's about technology, entertainment, and design, but we still had a perspective, because all of that is well and good, but there's still a value judgment, right? Like, ideas worth spreading. Who decides what's worth spreading? And that was us as a team, as curators. So we were very clear in the very beginning. I remember the first 2 or 3 years we'd do an event and we'd get a call from HQ in New York, and they'd say, "Oh, Maryam, like, the event was good, but it was, it was a bit too human rightsy, like a bit too social." And I remember saying to them, "Look, I'm trying, but I go to a mathematician and she wants to talk about equality. I go to a banker and he wants to talk about like equality. I go to, I'm going to all of these people and they all want to talk about justice and equality. Like, that is what people want to talk about." And they're like, "Oh, it's a bit social." And I would, every year I'd go, yeah. And then I would just go and do what I needed to do. And then about 6 years in, the world just changed, right? 2017, 2018. And all of a sudden I wasn't the outlier. Everyone was there. Even TED realized they had to take a stand, because things that we thought were just given, like, climate change is real, racism is bad, women are equal, which we all just had thought we had already agreed on, all of a sudden became up for debate. And if in a world where that kind of stuff is up for debate, I think even TED realized that they had to take a side, right? On what side of history do you want to be on? And so instead of then getting a call every year about the things that I was maybe doing wrong, I would get a call every year about how we were like the best example of promoting these kinds of voices. And every time they say that, I say, "Thank you. I just want to remind you that you didn't used to think this way." But yeah, I think I took my creative director to a TED Summit event in Edinburgh a few years ago, where all these TEDx's were there. She'd never been to an event with other TEDx organizers. And everyone was talking like, "Oh, like, how big is your event? Where do you hold it? How many speakers do you have? How many views do you have?" And she just went around asking everyone, "What's your theme?" And everyone was like, "Oh, nothing, like opportunity or innovation." And we'd realized very quickly at that point that we had been led by these like really strong values themes from the beginning, and that had meant that we had endured sometimes when in quite a difficult and competitive landscape.
Yeah,
I just see that we've got a question from Simon Bucknell really quickly. He says, "What do you think has happened that helps to explain that sea of change in public debate and discourse, the sea of change that happened in that 2017
You're really going to make me say it, aren't you? Brexit, Trump, the rise of the far right, environmental catastrophe, global economic crash, the results of the global economic crash becoming much more felt, like that, the really big things in the world, the refugee crisis getting to a point where it became something that we could no longer sweep under the rug, basically like Black Lives Matter, basically all the things. If I can put it this way, for those of us who have lived in bodies that were always marginalized, whether they be queer bodies, fat bodies, gay, trans bodies, disabled bodies, black and brown bodies, whatever, the world has always been like this for us. Female bodies, like whatever it is, we've never had the choice to live in a world where we could ignore what was happening, because all of those things affected our lives on a day-to-day basis, and all we were doing was putting that on stage. What happened as well, and this is a really good point, Simon, that your question brings out, is the TED curation changed. Chris, I think, had a real moment of realization that he had blind spots, and as do we all. Like, we all can't represent everything and be everything for everyone. So we brought in more curators. And when you bring in more curators from both diverse backgrounds in terms of their lived experience, but also diverse backgrounds in terms of their academic backgrounds and their area of interest, that meant that it opened up. And I think we started to see that actually for probably most of this world, there isn't a neutral middle ground that they can live in.
Yeah, No, definitely. And I suppose my question would be, 10 years ago, TEDx London was talking about equality. We had this big explosion of change when suddenly we had to talk about equality, and the whole narrative from TED, from HQ changed. So where do you see the future going now that TED's on board, now that we're all sort of having to think about these big geopolitical questions very immediately? Before it was sort of a bit more removed, a bit more, well, yes, there's a climate change issue, but type thing. So where do you see the future of TEDx being?
Yeah, I think one of them is absolutely about increasing the conversation and the voices and the demographic involved in the climate change conversation. You know, in my kind of commercial work in my own company, I've spent the last 18 months working almost exclusively on climate change. And it's super exciting. It's made me more optimistic because I see the amazing brains around the world working on this issue and acting. But I also now see so much more clearly how everything that I care about is undermined by climate change. Like women's rights, equality, everything, you know, is undermined by a changing and heating climate. And so I've come to become really passionate, hence, you know, starting to host this podcast about bringing more and more people into it. And I think that is something that you see reflected across the TEDx community as well. And that's where I think the future is.
We've just got another question from Hannah. It says, to someone who's passionate about a number of things and not just one solid topic, how would you advise someone on choosing their content? What should the process look like for them? Researching, attending talks, and a range of topics.
Yeah, great question. So you can start by thinking about a very simple Venn diagram. On one side is all the things that you know, that you've spent years understanding, you know, and then on the other side, on the other circle, you have the things that you're passionate about, that you care deeply about, that you always come back to in a conversation. And you look at where those two things, your knowledge and your passion, overlap. In there lies the beginnings of your idea worth spreading. Then it's about funneling it down from a topic to an idea. So, you know, it's not about saying, if I give an example, like you want to get from a big broad thing like medicine and technology to a, like, you know, like to a specific idea, like we can use the way that dogs can smell malaria to design sensors of the future. You know, one is a topic, the other is an absolutely real and on TED.com and spoke at TEDx London idea about dogs detecting malaria, and now they're being trained to detect COVID, which is pretty awesome. So you want to ask these narrowing questions: why, how, and sometimes people will get really close and they'll have like a question like why the future of business is about I don't know, caring about society. And then I'd say, okay, answer that question. Like answer your own question. That's your core idea. And there's two reasons here. One is you have to, Roxane Gay talks about this when it comes to writing in her masterclass, about how you have to believe that this will not be the only time you ever speak in the history of the time where you have to shove everything into it. So, right, you have to have belief that you will speak at other times. So this is just one opportunity. And then you have to get to this narrow idea, because that becomes your guiding through line. It becomes the thing that allows you to choose what you include and don't include. And especially when you have diverse interests, you need something that's like a litmus test. Otherwise you go off on all these tangents. You know, there has to be, I always think that when you start to get to this level of public speaking, and especially when you're someone who speaks a lot, you're no longer writing content, you're curating content. You've already written your content, loads of it, right? Now you're just deciding, what do I say from the hundreds of things I could say?
Yeah, no, definitely. And trying to sort of whittle it down, I suppose, is the magic of the process and the bit really exciting bit. We've had another question in on something a little bit different. Someone who wants to get involved, maybe not in a speaker capacity, but just wants to get involved in the organisational bit and the sort of behind the scenes of TEDx London. How would they do that? And also, what does it entail? What would people be signing up for?
Yeah, so at this stage, TEDx London specifically is run entirely by volunteers, including me. So it's a volunteer gig. And I guess asterisks, and there's loads of problematic things with that, but that is where we are until I'm able to raise more money. So if anyone knows of any, big companies or wealthy individuals looking for a good place to park a couple of million, I'm here. But we're volunteer run.
As well as the ESU.
Yes, as well as the ESU, we will split it.
Us. Yeah.
It will be like a joint lottery ticket. So we do, so all the things you can imagine in live events production we have. So we have set designers and creative directors and producers and camera, and we've got volunteer managers and registration and customer service and comms and marketing and photography, everything you can imagine we've got. Some are larger roles, so that sit on our core team and work with us all year. Some are smaller roles that come in just for like the day before and the day of the event and everything in between. So that, and so you can give, like, as I said, like a day and a half on the day of the event, or you can give, a day a week for some people on our core team. And the easiest way to find out about any of that for any TEDx is to just sign up for that organization's newsletter, because that's like getting it into your inbox is going to be the easiest way to find out when we're recruiting or what's happening.
I suppose it's very similar also to the English speaking union as well. The amount of volunteering opportunities that we have that we send out via newsletter, which of course, if there's people here watching today who would like to get involved in the ESU, which I think is also can be understood as a baby step as well, if to getting more involved in public speaking and oracy, being able to judge debates, being able to take part in debates, being able to understand the importance of oracy and be able to communicate with other people who might disagree with you as well. I think that's all part of the package that the ESU offers and what you work in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's something, I'm sure it's also the same for all of you, like there is something magical about having a passionate group of people giving their time to create something. I've just, for me, I love the speakers and they give me so much energy and joy, but the other thing that really fuels me equally is watching a group of 15 people who all believe in the same thing, who all are pulling in the same direction, and who all know that, because I don't know, in the world of work, sometimes you get pretty nasty, can get pretty undercutting, pretty competitive. And our team know that like none of that works here. The only thing that works is helping every single person move forward together. So there's no reason to undercut or to compete with the person next to you. In fact, actually what you need to be doing is all pulling us forward to create these amazing opportunities. And I think every volunteer organization, that's kind of part of their magic.
And I suppose that's also what a lot of the work for the ESU does. I remember being a judge with the Churchill speaking competition and seeing this these groups of very young children, year 8, year 9, year 7, all together, so passionate about a topic which when I had entered into be that judge for that debate, I didn't know that much about. And they were the passion that they brought to the room was just incredible. And then afterwards in the feedback sessions, which were meant to last 15 minutes between 5 different groups, actually ended up being an hour and 15, just because they kept on asking questions, they kept on wanting to learn. I think that's exactly that's why I feel like I volunteer, and why you volunteer your time as well, to be helping and be part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's nothing else like it.
I think I can see Simon plugging in a few things, and I think given that oracy isn't currently in our curriculum, the work that the ESU does, the work that TEDx does in trying to get people to sort of articulate their thoughts, if you know of any secondary schools, if you're a governor, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if it's your old secondary school, and you think that they could benefit from from learning how to speak, from learning how to articulate, how their kids can articulate their thoughts, then do drop us an email, because we're currently trying to recruit as many schools as possible, so that Maryam's job and that our job isn't just afforded by the few, but actually afforded by the many and by all. And Maryam, I'm sure you'll echo your support for that and for all of the stuff that we're trying to do and trying to engage with.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's wonderful.
This is definitely something as well that the pandemic has, greatly influenced with young. I mean, I know certainly for my niece, who's 4 years old and has been, kind of in and outside of the education, interacting with friends and peers, that actually ability to speak and to be able to communicate, it's just been limited to just, her mom, her dad, her brother, and that's it. For lots of children, I think that's also the case for children across, all the way up into 18.
Yeah, I do. And I know that from our perspective, one of the big questions that we have is, when are people, because not only have we become more isolated and we speak to fewer people, we've become more isolated, and I think unlocking is harder than we've ever realized. So, how long is it going to be before we feel comfortable being in a room together? Like, realistically, how long is it going to be, until we can fill a 2,000 person theatre with 2,000 people sitting, if you think about it, sitting next to each other, sneezing on one another, breathing on one another, like we've got a lot of adjusting to do. But I do think as an incredible podcast, I've forgotten the name of the speaker, he's a psychologist, and he's part of the TED kind of world, and he's talking about how TEDx's are an incredible opportunity for communities to heal. And I'm kind of excited to help play a role in doing that, because I think there needs to be a way to talk about what we've all collectively gone through, and these kinds of platforms, with the SU in schools, with us kind of out there in different places, is a great way to give voice to that.
I suppose almost to backtrack slightly to actually the very beginning of your kind of TEDx, were you at TEDx East, TEDx East London?
East End, yeah.
Yeah, East End. Was that more centered towards community there? And do you feel is because you think about just focusing on the East End of London compared to the rest of London, has that been a difficult process to move between and from to more community centered? Is that less community centered, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, it's definitely taking over the London license and going on that scale definitely meant we couldn't have as much. There were a lot of things we got to do as East End that we got to do in a really like arts and crafts DIY way, purposefully, because it was fun. We could have always hired someone to build our stage, but we would always get like a literal army of volunteers to come in and make 300 signs that go up on stage, or one time fold like 700 paper airplanes, like that kind of stuff. And we didn't. Then when we took over TEDx London, I think there was a bit of a pressure for us to definitely be a bit more slick. We've tried to make sure that we're still very plugged into the community, and now that we're London instead of East End, we can extend that out to more of London. But I definitely think there's a sense in the team, as we talk about kind of returning from the pandemic, that maybe we want to be a bit more hands-on. Maybe we do want to be a bit more kind of, I don't know, friendly in that way and less polished. I'm excited to find a world where you can be both. So yeah, that's kind of the change for us.
I suppose that's for like an outsider of TEDx. I suppose that's what's kind of sometimes a bit scary, the fact that they see, when you see TEDx, we're like, oh, polished. Like sometimes also the people that speak, sometimes you feel like, how can I be that? How can I get there? Yeah. So I suppose one of the final questions I'd like to ask is, if you could give 3 pieces of advice to someone who's wanting to get started on this journey of public speaking, what advice would that be?
Okay, so one thing, so the first one would be like that you have to, is being a confident public speaker doesn't start with confidence. It starts with speaking. So I want you to know that, like, so I guess the three things is that you have to believe in your voice. And so it's not about just building confidence for nothing. It's about believing that your voice is valuable and doing what you need to get there. So that's one piece of advice. The second is that this is like a skill like any other. And if you want to get better at it, you can. You just have to practice, and you need to find a way of getting the how, getting the skills to be able to practice something. And then the third thing is be a generous speaker, be known to be a generous speaker. Be aware of what it is that you want to leave people with and make that something of value.
That's very wise advice, Maryam.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much, Maryam. I see it's coming just up to 6 o'clock now. And I think that was a very practical last few things to give everyone to remember on, I would say, their journey back home tonight, but I suppose I'm in my bedroom at the moment, so not too far to go. So I really want to thank you so much for giving your time up today to come to an ESU London branch event, and ESU-wide events. It's been really exciting speaking to you and hearing so much from the people that you've worked with, but also your own journey as well, and the advice that you've provided. So again, thank you so much. And just one final plug for the English Speaking Union. If you would like to become involved, please do. I think that as we've been speaking about today in our talk, as we're coming out of the pandemic, I think that we are thinking in different ways. I think that we are trying to do things in different ways. And I think with the English Speaking Union, we are trying to do things in different ways too. And I think that we're evolving as well. And I think that it's such an exciting time to join any volunteering organization at the moment. And so it'd be absolutely fantastic if anyone here would like to drop Simon a message in the email that he has provided, and get involved in either the new Obviously group, which Serena's already spoken about, or volunteer in any other capacity with some of the public speaking competitions that we run. Would be absolutely fantastic. So again, thank you, Maryam. It was wonderful. Thank you everybody who attended, and I hope to see you at future ESU events too.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye everyone. Thank you so much.